Right, oops. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Okay. Can we start by just going around the table? I'd like to welcome everybody. I've had a couple of apologies from Councillor Dr. Barclay and from Mrs. Khan. So if we could just introduce ourselves. I'm Denise Weston, Councillor for Broadheath Ward and Chair of Children and Young People's Scrutiny Committee.
I'm Councillor Thomas Carey, Village Ward Councillor and the Vice Chair. Thank you.
Councillor John Holden, St Mary's Ward.
Councillor Linda Blackburn, Davyhulme East Ward.
Councillor Shirley Proctor, Flixton Ward.
I'm Kath Hines. I'm the exec member for Children's Services. I'm not a member of the committee, but I'm hopefully invited to attend.
Hello, I'm Councillor Karina Carter, Councillor for Davyhulme West Ward and lead member for education. Same deal as Kath, I'm invited.
Hi, I'm Karen McCallum and I'm the Head of the Education of Vulnerable Children's Service and Advisor for the Education of Vulnerable Children.
Good evening, I'm Jed Rowney. I'm the Interim Director of Children's Services here in Trafford.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Stephen Longdon for Brooklands Ward.
I'm Councillor David Acton, Gorse Hill Ward.
St Martin's. Fabiola Fuschi, Governance Officer.
Thank you, everybody. Do we have any declarations of interest at all? No. I'm not aware of any urgent business. So if we move on to item 4 of the agenda, I'm not aware of any questions from members of the public. We'll just remind people that this meeting will be webcast. So please do use your microphones and please remember to switch them off when you've finished. We have in front of us at agenda item 5 the minutes of the previous meeting. Can those be accepted as a true record? That okay with everybody? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Page 1. Sorry, it's just that I've noticed there's just a councillor's name's wrong in attendances.
Is it a spelling or is it somebody missed up? Oh.
Denise, I know it's pathetic, but I was at that meeting and I'm not down here on attending.
Okay, can we amend that, please, Fabio? You're okay, apologies. Okay. And I believe that Councillor Hines was actually present at that meeting as well. Yeah. Oh, right, okay. So if we move on to item 6, which is the minutes from the Startwell board. Is any questions arising from that?
Not the minutes from the Startwell board, just really kind of matters arising from the minutes, if I may, Chair. As you know, I emailed yourself and Fabiola on page 5 of the minutes. It was said that we would be, it says, further to the update brought to this committee at its next meeting in October 2019, the update would include an action plan to address Ofsted recommendations. And whilst we got an overview of the action plan, we didn't get the actual final updated version of the action plan. And that was only received today when Fabiola sent it to us. It's just really for moving forward, particularly for important items like that when the action plan is inevitably updated as it should be, that we get the full 10 days, 2 weeks notice so we get a chance to absorb it. Otherwise, I feel I'm not able to, to give my full say in terms of the action plan, because I've just not had time to go through it in the kind of detail that I think it's important that we as a scrutiny committee do.
Did you want to respond, Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I do apologise for that, Councillor, but we had put the plan on the Council's website and publicised it, and I've given a copy of the plan on the page, obviously, which summarised it, but I do apologise it hadn't been sent out individually.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions regarding the minutes of the Startwell board, which we've had? Councillor Dillon.
Just a couple of things. One is I'm interested in the Maternity Voices partnership. It said funding hadn't been identified to support this. I'm just wondering if we're any further on with that. And also, just a really quick question. I don't know what 0 to 19 needs assessment means. If somebody could just briefly explain, please.
Okay. Can anybody, what page is it on, Councillor Dillon? Page 9.
Do we think, would it be helpful if you got a copy of that report? I think, yeah, should we circulate a copy
Yeah,
of that
if that's
report?
okay.
Do you want any prior kind of, I mean, I suppose I don't know if you'd want all of the reports always circulated, because that might be a bit onerous, but if there's any that come out of this that you want copies of, I think there's absolutely no reason why we wouldn't be able to share that with yourselves, I think. So if we can get you a copy of that report. In terms of the maternity question, there seemed to be, and I don't know if you can remember this, Jed, there seemed to be quite a discussion going on between health and the council around how that was being funded, and there's been some questions. So I think it's been outstanding for some time, but I think what transpired at that meeting is the reason it's been outstanding for some time is because it hasn't been properly articulated until recently what was required. I think that's been resolved now and it's gone back to health. Can you remember any more about that? But it was it was vague at the time, wasn't it?
We were writing a letter of concern about the funding.
And then there's we are now writing a letter of concern about the funding, but I think health came back to say, but there is a reason why it's not being funded, and that's because there was some ambiguity around what was required. Is that right?
I think it's also to do that we haven't got that medical officer in post.
Yeah. Can we come back to you and get an update on that? Let you know. Sorry to be so vague.
Okay, thank you, Kath. If we could move on, if everybody's happy with that, to item 7, and I'm going to ask Karen McCallum to present the information on the exclusion from schools.
Tom?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just pointing.
Yeah,
Might be
sorry.
closer because so we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Hi. I'd like to start off by saying, obviously, you've asked me to come here to talk about exclusions tonight. I don't think there's a great cause for alarm around exclusions in Trafford, but there are obviously, as everywhere, some areas where we could, delve deeper and make some changes. We have really good relationships with the schools in Trafford, and we're a small team, pretty much one officer doing most of this work. But we have really good relationships, and those head teachers will ring us for advice and guidance and recommendations. Sorry, shall I move a bit nearer? Advice and guidance and recommendations around what else they could do. So if I start off talking about fixed period exclusions, in Trafford they're very low, they're much lower than the national average. And the exclusion of children in need or children of child protection is very, very low. So there really is no areas there that we're concerned about. But we do need more data for looking at the vulnerable groups. We do believe that there is an issue around exclusion of SEN children, particularly if we remove the data from some of the special schools, that figure comes back in line. But the problem we have at the moment is our systems, which have been around for a long time. I think the one we used for exclusions was probably built around 2000. So we do have a problem with data. The exclusion data sits in one system, which is an access system. The SEN data sits in a separate system, and the school admissions data sits in a separate system. And this is an issue where over the years since the performance team reduced, we have great problems actually then delving down into that data. And we have to, it takes quite a lot of time trying to work out what patterns and trends are happening. We have got schools signed up. About 2/3 of the schools now have signed up to something called Group Call, which gives us the SIMS live register data. And from that, we can extract exclusion against the SEN status that schools have recorded and on and off rolls showing. So we can start to look at those figures, and that can give us an indicator. But until we have every school on it, we haven't got that up to the minute data. And we have to rely on DFE data, which is obviously published, out a few years behind times, particularly with the exclusions. So that is one of our issues at the moment. So more data is required, and we are looking at how that can be improved. We are talking to various people within the authority around how we can make those systems work better together.
Can I just
Yeah.
ask if you have indicates that there is an issue with exclusions of pupils with SEN? What are those issues?
Sorry. It does show that there are higher than we would expect exclusions of children with an EHCP. We can't extract the data for SEN support, but what we can do is look by schools. So when we've looked, we've got a higher proportion per percentage of the population of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The data that we do have indicates that there is an issue with exclusions of pupils.
Yes, and that is the data we're taking from that system that shows 63 schools. So from those 63 schools, there is an indicator, but in those 63 schools are the special schools. So we can only extrapolate across Trafford from that data. But yes, we are aware, and we want the systems to be able to give us more depth on that so we can look more closely. But we have identified a handful of schools with higher than we would expect, which we can then work with. Okay. So there's around 1,000 fixed period exclusions every year in Trafford, and we have 55 permanent exclusions. So of those permanent exclusions, as I said, the head teachers do tend to ring us up. In most cases, they will ring us. They'll say, we think we've reached this point. Is there something else we should be doing differently? If it's a child who has an EHCP, then definitely. And if it's a child who should be receiving and is in that point, then yes, we will then liaise with our SEN colleagues. And between us, we will then look at what other options are available. And between us, we will then look at what other options are available. We probably save about 10 permanent exclusions a year where the head teacher will withdraw them. And then another that never actually get to that point. So the ones that are withdrawn are usually SEN children where SEN have then become involved. Perhaps the schools either haven't started the process early enough for one reason or other, or the behaviour has escalated fairly quickly, and so it's kind of ahead of them actually going through the process. So then we will try and intervene. We'll try to put assessment places in rather than a permanent exclusion to work in the best interests of the child. So obviously, but the pattern is less uniform across. Much louder there. Sorry, the pattern is less uniform across the schools for the fixed periods and the permanents. The permanent exclusions I'll come on to explain. The number of days lost to fixed period exclusions varies across schools. And one of the things that we have done in the past, and we want to do again soon, is get head teachers sitting around a room, talk about scenarios, and try and get consensus of what's a reasonable period. I think the DFE would say that 3 days any longer than 3 days doesn't have much impact on the child. That's too long. Occasionally, a school will do a 5-day where it's something really serious and they need to investigate. And we also ask schools if they're going to permanently exclude, we'd rather they issued a 5-day fixed period exclusion and warn the parents this may become permanent, while they then explore every avenue to prevent it, and also make sure that they've got the evidence and it is what they think it is. So a lot of schools will do that. They will issue a 5-day in the first instance before making that final decision of whether to permanently exclude or not, because we don't want it to be in the heat of the moment. So it's good practice to do that.
Councillor Longden.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask on both the fixed term exclusions and the permanent exclusions. You've highlighted that there is an issue with the number of children that have an EHCP plan, although I appreciate what you're saying about not having the SEN status data. Could you tell us, in terms of the permanent exclusions, what is the national rate of exclusion per school population? What is the average national, and for the Northwest as well, for the last year that we have that information? I appreciate the academic year just gone, we won't have that data yet. Raise Online is not published, but we will have it for the previous year. And I'd be interested to get your comments on where Trafford stands, both within the Northwest and nationally, and the latest available data, which will be 17-18.
Yes, sorry, I have to put my glasses on for this bit because the numbers bit is the bit I don't remember off the top of my head.
I empathise with that.
Very well. So I can talk about the systems and the processes all day, but the numbers. So I know Trafford's number for last year off by heart was 0.16% as a percentage of proportion of the population. The national figure for last year for England was 0% was the English one. Yeah, and the Northwest was 0.11. So we were higher last year. We were aware of that. I've been doing this role or similar role for 15 years, and we were always right at the bottom. We were always one of the best performing authorities as regarding exclusions. And in 2014-15, something changed.
May I ask a follow-up question, Chair? What's your hypothesis for why that's changing?
Not gone on. I don't think there's one single reason. It'd be wonderful if we had one reason to say that's what it is. I think there's a few reasons, but I do think yes, obviously SEN changing, the SEN reforms of 20 around that period of time. I do think funding in schools and in local authorities and agencies and all the other support has changed. School staff, when they're looking at reducing their staffing because of funding cuts, the first staff to go are often the pastoral staff and the support staff. So I think that early intervention has really been hit, and that early recognition is one of the reasons why I do think that has been. I think there's a lot of impact from loss of so many services in preventing things earlier and not getting to that point. I would like to say a piece of good news is that we've obviously been working on this. We've been working with schools, we've been working with Senkos, and our figures for this last year are 0.12% at the moment, the raw figures. So we have gone down over the last academic year from 0.16 to 0.12. So our permanent exclusions are dipping.
And I also got kind of a broader question, if I may, Chair. Thank you. And that's about the fact that you've highlighted we have an issue with exclusions, both permanent and fixed term with SEN students. But I'm wondering why we're not able to highlight the schools where we know they've got a higher rate of permanent exclusions and where SEN is also an issue. What's the reason for that?
Well, we do work with the schools closely. I don't think there is one standout school for higher rates of permanent exclusions. It varies from year to year, and certain years one school will be higher, another year it'll be other schools. But I think also you have to look at those schools with the higher rates of exclusions are the ones who are taking the most number of pupils during the year. The pupil mobility is a massive issue, and because we're a selective authority, and then even within that, within the high schools, we have girls' schools, boys' schools, faith schools. You will find 4 or 5 schools take a lot of pupils in year, a lot of pupils. And if you actually look at the year 11 exam data for those schools, a lot of those pupils were not from that school to start with, so that impacts on their outcomes as well.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, just to conclude, in terms of the evidence you've provided, what we can conclude from that is there's been a higher rate of permanent exclusion and fixed term exclusion in Trafford because, and the majority of the reasons you provided was because of cuts to school budgets, and in relation to SEN students being at a higher rate due to the fact that we are in a selective educational borough. Am I right in concluding that?
No, I don't think that's quite what I was meaning.
Well, my apologies. Could you clarify for me, please?
Yes, I do. As I said, I think there are lots of reasons why permanent exclusions have increased.
I was trying to summarise the main points
Yeah.
that you were making.
Well, that is one of the reasons is SEN reform and cuts and various services available. That's just one reason. I don't think it's as simple as being one area. And I think in one of my reports, I did outline a list of reasons that I thought might have impacted. I don't have it to hand at the moment, but sitting thinking it through, all the different reasons that might have impacted on those exclusions. I also think there's changes in society, there's changes in expectations. I think a lot of children coming through now have lived a different life to children 20 years ago, and so that definitely impacts on behaviour, school expectation, and progress. So I don't think it's as simple as saying one thing. We've seen increases in lots of areas.
Okay, thank you very much for
Thank
that.
you, Karen. Councillor Blackburn, did you have a question?
Could I just ask if a young person who's got an EHCP and studies at a special school and is permanently excluded, and the special school takes in mainly young people who have emotional and behavioural problems, where would that young person end up being educated?
Well, I'm not an SEN, part of the SEN service, but we would really hope that no special school will permanently exclude a pupil. We don't want it, but having said that, exclusion is the head teacher's decision. Yeah. And despite our advice, they can just ignore that and go ahead. So if it was a special school, I think that it would then go back to SEN panel, who would then be looking at what provision could be put in place for that pupil elsewhere. We have the same issue with the PRU. Thankfully, our PRU don't permanently exclude, but it's the same issue. We have to then find another provision.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Proctor, did you have a question?
Thank you. I'd like to ask about the ethnicity data capture. You've got in your report that it's patchy, it isn't recorded effectively across all schools, and that out of all the children who are permanently excluded, white British children are by far the biggest. Why don't schools automatically record ethnicity, please?
I don't think that it's schools don't record it, it's our data capture. Our data capture is manually. So we are sent the permanent exclusion letter that parents are sent. And from that, our admin service every year have to put in over 1,000 data entries. And it hasn't been. And this is why we're saying about we need a system that is going to capture all of that information and put it in, because it's a very labour intensive system and doesn't allow us to do the things you're saying. So we do recognise that is an issue.
Can I just ask, and I realise that there could be financial issues here, are there any plans in place to put in such a system that would capture data across the board, a joined up, sort of give us a more joined up picture?
Well, apart from group call, which the council are providing to schools, it's quite a low cost solution, but it doesn't do everything because it is a low cost solution. It costs about £12,000 a year, I think. It doesn't do all the work for us, but it does give us the raw data. Some of my team have been in meetings talking about liquid logic, because there are liquid logic modules that could be attached that would do this for us, and in other authorities I think they use similar modules to that. So we have had talks, but that's as far as it's got at the moment. I think Cathy Atherton's exploring how that might work at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Acton.
Thank you. Can I just go back to those high excluding schools, who are also those schools who take a higher proportion of pupils with issues, and it seems to me, because I see it all the time, that it's a cycle really of a few schools who take in all the children which, exhibit behavioural problems. And it seems to me very unfair, because obviously those schools are trying to provide the best education that they possibly can. And it seems to me that they fight a losing battle sometimes. And also, when Ofsted comes in and they look at their exclusions, and it just seems totally unfair to me. And I've seen it for years and years and years, and I probably know the answer to it, but I would hope that, the schools should all come together and play their part in trying to work together in terms of those exclusions, because it seems totally unfair to me that it's just, the problem that is caused by this, impacts on those just very few schools. And it's just like a vicious circle.
Yes, and I do sympathise with that. Part of the problem, as you're probably aware, is the admissions process, because every secondary school in Trafford, with the exception of one, is its own admissions authority. So when a parent comes into Trafford, or the permanently excluded child looking for a place, they have to go around to the individual schools trying to apply. And if the schools are full, they say no, and the child's going around. So we have suggested that maybe Trafford schools could agree to have a combined admission, to go back to the authority managing admissions. There's also talk nationally of that happening. At the moment, it is recognised it is an issue, so there is talk of that, because it does seem unfair. We have moved forward with the Fair Access Protocol as best we can, and we are distributing slightly wider, but again, we can't distribute to grammar schools, but the Fair Access Protocol is allocating children to schools other than those few that normally take them.
Councillor Carter, did you want to say something?
Just a quick question, really, Karen, because Stephen, you and I both know exclusions are massively on the increase, and as I say, as chair of a high school that does a lot. Now, in Trafford, do you have any issue with academies sharing the data around exclusions, or do all schools hand it over when they're asked?
Well, it's a statutory duty to report it. They have no choice but to report it to us. So, no, they do. Occasionally one doesn't come through quickly because somebody's forgotten to send something, but no, they all have to tell us on their exclusions. And from, I think it's next census, they're also going to have to report the independent review panels, because one of the anomalies is that academies can organise their own independent review panels and we wouldn't know anything about them. So I think that's going on the next census collection.
Thank you. Councillor Blackburn.
Could I just ask, please, with regard to the fixed period exclusions, the out of borough resident pupils, what kind of interaction do we have with themselves and their families when that happens?
For the fixed period, well, that is a question the schools would answer, because we wouldn't have that level of knowledge for fixed period exclusions. We have about 1,000 a year, and it will be the schools that will be dealing with the parents for that.
Doesn't it revert to their home borough?
If it's
borough is responsible for the 6.
If it's permanent, but if it's a fixed period, no. If it's a fixed period, it's the school that's responsible. So we wouldn't be involved at that point.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carey.
Thank you. Just got 2 little points. The first one was regarding the data you just gave a minute ago. I just want to make sure I got it right, that it was 0.1% across England, 0.11% in the northwest, and we stood here in Trafford at 0.16%. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm the same. That's blurry to me with my glasses on.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was for 2016 to 17, was it? Am I right? 17, 18. Brilliant. And, we've gone from being one of the best performing boroughs, and I assume that England and the Northwest have also gone through the same sort of trials and tribulations that every school's gone through. And that sort of dramatic change that we seem to have had, I'm not sure we can just account for it in some of the 1 or 2 of the responses that you gave specifically just for Trafford. My second point was around the number of pupils in schools with EHC plans. We're doing an SCN task and finish group, the committee at the moment, about children who are being expelled with EHC plans. It's really interesting. My experience, because I'm a school teacher here in Trafford, in a school that has the largest amount of children with EHC plans in the borough combined, we have the lowest amount of SCN expulsions, if not zero. And one of the things we've been discussing on the committee was around some of the other schools maybe encouraging people who apply to the schools where they have large numbers. And it's as though they don't have the experience, even though they're getting all the resources they need, and they're just kind of moving that responsibility away. And then when they're exposed to difficulties, maybe one of their responses is this sort of harsh mentality of exclusion, fixed term exclusion. I just think it just needs to be expressed that some of these schools maybe are behaving like this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think if I take them in reverse order because it's fresher, we don't have many permanent exclusions of children with EHCP. It's very rare. And in fact, thinking back to last year, I think the one that I recall was from an outer borough school. It wasn't even a Trafford school. In fact, two of them I think were not Trafford schools, and we probably only had two, where it's very, very low for permanent. For fixed period exclusions, and the point you made about recommending schools, we're absolutely neutral. Admissions are absolutely neutral, so we wouldn't recommend parents to go to any particular school. And as regards fixed period exclusion of children with SEN, I don't know. I can't answer that question if that is what is happening, but until we can dig down. But a lot of our SEN exclusions are from special schools, so not from. So until we can get that whole data and be sure, my feeling is that it isn't a massive issue. It's spread fairly evenly. We do find primary schools, I mean, we also sell a service level agreement that gives advice and guidance. And we found with primary schools, it'll be a different primary school perhaps each year who haven't come across certain issues before. It's fresh to them. They're not quite sure how to handle it. There might be a couple of exclusions, and then we get involved and we're advising them. And then somebody leaves the school and that experience has gone, and we start advising the next person again. So we don't really see big spikes. We see ripples in that area. If you remember the first point you raised was around other authorities, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's just saying how we seem to have jumped quite a lot compared to other areas and nationally and in the Northwest, when we've always been one of the best performing boroughs, to have that quite big jump. I know it's reduced, like you say, so far this year, but it just seems like the data seems a bit strange there.
Well, I attend Northwest exclusion meetings. Unfortunately, I missed the one on Friday, which one of my colleagues went to. So a lot of local authorities from the Northwest meet every term to discuss, very frankly, where we're up to. I won't name authorities, but a lot of them are saying, well, we're throwing money at exclusions. We've got teams going into schools. We're taking the children out of the school before they're permanently excluded. One authority, which has actually just changed its policy, would say, oh, we've had 7 permanent exclusions, but we've had 500 managed moves. So it's exclusion by another name. And I've always said in Trafford, I don't believe in a zero exclusion policy. I really believe we have to have it open and above board. And there are times where a school will have to do that. But as soon as you start calling it something else and preventing it, you push it underground. And those children are the ones that then suffer because they're not getting the support they need. So I do think in a lot of authorities, there is a lot more money. Blackpool have this massive fund that they're throwing into it. So,
but it's really gone down.
Thank you. Councillor Hines, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, I think my points have mostly been made, but I did want to pick up on the national picture and something that Councillor Axon said about Ofsted. I think there is a national movement really around Ofsted focusing more on the support that schools can give to children, and that much rounded experience of children with particular needs, particularly around behavioural needs, that pastoral care. So there is a movement kind of to put pressure on Ofsted to scrutinise schools in a different way, really. And I think that is incredibly important. While Ofsted is focusing largely on results, that can sometimes be to the detriment of the overall experience of children in schools. And my other point really was just that I think it's incredibly important. I am aware that this committee has a task and finish around exclusions and SEND. I think that is a really important piece of work, and I think it's also really important that us as an authority scrutinise what schools are doing, and that we do support schools to be as inclusive as they can be, that we're not an exclusive Trafford as a selective borough, that actually we are an inclusive borough, and I think that's really, really important that we do that work.
Thank you, Kath. Councillor Longden, do you have a last question, did you?
Yeah, it was just a little point of order for you. You mentioned that you had heard that there'd been discussions nationally, presumably in the political field, around looking at changing the entrance criteria, admissions criteria for schools. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit? Who's having those discussions? Where's that coming from?
This has come from general discussions around the Timpson review, Edward Timpson's review of exclusions and some of the recommendations. And apparently at the meeting last week, which I wasn't there, but the DFE were, they were discussing this. I know that the Ombudsman, they had admissions every year when our admissions send their annual report. That is one of the areas that's put into the report quite often. So nothing concrete yet, but there seemed to be the growing feeling that this needs to happen nationally, but certainly within Trafford. I think with Ofsted as well, I think the new framework is far more inclusive. It's far more inclusive than it was. And also the DFE said on Friday at the meeting that they are looking at rewriting all the exclusion guidance and behaviour guidance that'll be out in 2020. So there does seem to be a real shift. Just waiting for that to come through, really. And I do want to say that with the numbers we're talking about here, are very small numbers. We're talking about 0.12% of our pupil population. We're talking 50, which is spread across the schools.
Okay, Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you. Could I just ask the Fair Access panel, who sits on that?
It's chaired by the Director of Education, Karen Samples, and then we have one of the school improvement advisors, and then 3 head teachers, and they rotate. This is a secondary one. The primary one I'm not involved in. It's a slightly different setup, with it not being the selective school issue. So 3 secondary head teachers who take it in turns to sit on the panel.
Ask the inclusion charter for Trafford schools. When is that likely to be set up?
Well, the idea germinated in September. Karen Harris and Karen Samples have been working on it, but we obviously want to add in aspects around exclusions and admission. So I know it's being worked on, but I couldn't give you a deadline, I'm afraid. I don't know if Jed's any idea of when.
Yeah, it was discussed at the head teachers meeting, secondary head teachers last week, and so the discussions have started. I think the idea is to have a draft in place in sort of spring term, and then take it forward from there.
Councillor Proctor.
My question is just about the cost of a new data system, because there's nothing here for me to see. Thanks.
Well, to be honest, at the moment, I don't have the figures. I know the member of my team who's been speaking to Kathy Atherton will have some outline areas. But what's become really apparent when putting the report together, the task and finish group, was that the data was the big issue. So, we've been in austerity for years. We've done the best we can. We've made Excel spreadsheets ourselves. And it was when putting that report together, it was really obvious that was the fundamental problem.
Okay. And Councillor Holden.
I'm afraid this is going to sound like a very basic question, but when a young person is excluded for whatever reason, they will eventually, hopefully, return to the school. As probably not a lot has been done during that intervening period to adjust their behaviour patterns, they will then be excluded again, quite likely. Would that be recorded as 2 exclusions or 1?
That would be recorded as second exclusion, but if you allow me to jump through a few slides, I've got the journey of a pupil, which is probably the next or the one after that slide. Yes, there you are. So the pupil's journey. So and I thought this might help. In the first 5 days, obviously the school sets work, and from the 6th day, our pupils all go on roll at Trafford High School, which is a statutory duty. I know not every authority meets that, but we're really lucky in Trafford to have Trafford High School, and we put them on roll there. They will then carry out assessments. So it will be about what are the underlying causes. It may be that they need some involvement from a drugs team. It may be that they do need SEN assessment, or maybe intervention of other agencies. So they will assess what their needs are. If those children don't have any needs that need to be addressed directly there or in a PRU, because some, for example, the drugs intervention, if it was an exclusion for drugs, could be done in a mainstream school, they will, once they've assessed them and they've settled down, they'll then recommend them for the bridge process. The bridge process we've developed about 2 years ago because the PRU with the number of exclusions was full. We had children awaiting SEN assessment in there. We had all these exclusions and it was very difficult. So we took the top-up funding that the PRU receive for every pupil over 32 and created these bridge places in schools using that money. So there was no cost. We're doing it with a no-cost solution. The bridge place isn't a unit in a school. It is just that those children go into that school. They may spend a day or 2 in the school's learning support unit, familiarising themselves. They may not. They may go straight into social areas, but not lessons. They may go straight into lessons, but not social time. It's about tailoring something to help that child get used to mainstream school again and to check that they're ready. If they're not ready and things really go badly, they go back into the PRU. If they're ready, the head teacher at the schools that host these places will then say to the other head teachers, this child is school ready. We then put together a pupil passport, which goes to Fair Access Panel. And at Fair Access Panel, they're allocated school places. We haven't had any permanent exclusions coming back from that. We've had 2 cases of year 11 pupils where there were difficulties and the PRU has supported those schools. But generally it's been a mainstream school. They may appear to be ready, but they still need a bit of extra understanding and support. So that was the purpose of the bridge, a no-cost solution which works for the pupils. I don't know if that answers your question.
Microphone only. Whether or not an exclusion followed by another exclusion for the same pupil counted as 2 to our scores, or whether that was 1 long one.
It does count as 2. We occasionally have had the same pupil permanently excluded twice in 1 year, but tends to be probably the following year. It would count as 2, and the difference is that when it counts as 2, if a pupil's been permanently excluded twice within a 2-year period, the school can refuse to take that pupil. So parental choice has gone if they've been permanently excluded twice within 2 years.
Can I just ask then, at that point, would the authority be obliged to try and place that child?
Well, yes, they would probably have to stay in Trafford High School because that is our provision. So those children would remain there. But I mean, if it was in year 7 and they had 2, then by year 9 or 10, possibly they might be school ready again. They could go back into school if they were at that point. But yes, they would stay at Trafford High School.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dillon.
I'm just looking at the recommendations here, and I think my question follows on a bit from Councillor Proctor's about the data system. So what I'm actually interested in is, if we get all this wonderful data that you're not able to access now, what are we actually going to do? Because what I'm interested in is results for these kids. How are we going to do things? How are we going to stop these kids, or at least lower the levels of exclusions? And the other thing I'm interested in, just really, really briefly, because I'm conscious of time, is the Behaviour and Standards Officer post. I'm just interested in that. And also, do we still use I thought we'd maybe moved away from using the word behaviour with vulnerable children.
Yeah. Well, the behaviour attendance strand of the old national strategies has remained in our service. So we have a behaviour and attendance aspect of the service. So that's where the name has just been historically, schools recognise that name. We sell an SLA to schools, so we do give advice and guidance. If we're going to be able to get the data and break it down, then we would be looking at maybe identifying the schools then, if it's specific to particular schools where there's high incidences, or if it's spread across the whole of the schools more evenly, what interventions we would put in place, what training we could offer to those schools. We'd work with the education psychologists, with the SEN team as well, and be looking at why it's higher in those schools in the first instance, and then what intervention and support we could put in place to try to reduce that within those schools. So until we have that data, it is hard to just go to a school cold and say, we want to come in and look at how your SEM practice is run. But if we have that data, we will then be able to approach the schools and say, we want to help you improve this. Yeah.
Really quickly. With a lot of our schools being academies, if this happens, as you've described, which sounds really good, so then you approach a school, and if it's an academy and they just want to shut the door in your face and do not want to, is there any way that you can insist that you can make something happen?
It depends what they've done or not done, I suppose, because some things will have a basis in legislation, but if they haven't, no. Having said that, most of the academies work with us with the service level agreement. Nearly all the academies buy it back. So we have good, strong relationships with most of them. And I think every head teacher, if you say to them, we want to help you improve your school, most of them are going to want to listen at least and see how you think you can do it.
I will stop speaking after this. Just thinking about all schools, all secondary schools I'm thinking of, and I'm thinking about the academic results and the GCSEs, and somewhere it says about years 10, years 8, 9 and 10 so they tend to be the kids that are at more risk of exclusions. Would we have anything, or can we get anything to do with why, if it's just before they start the GCSE course in year 10, or if, is there some kind of potential that some schools are liking to remove certain children that aren't going to achieve academically? I suppose that's kind of what I'm getting at. And if so, are we quite limited in what we do because that's just the system?
Off rolling, and it's gaming, really, isn't it? It's very, very hard to evidence. You might get a hearsay or somebody mention it, but it's very hard to evidence. Schools will say, well, we haven't, we've given them advice. You do get parents who jump ship. There's parents who are going to be prosecuted for non-attendance who will remove their child. You do get parents who will remove them before they're excluded, even though the school are not advocating that at all. From elective home education studies, we found that a lot of parents there are saying they've removed their children because they don't feel the school can meet their needs. And it could be that year 10, teenage years, is a time when all this comes into play. So I have spoken to a mother recently who's removed a child in year 10 because they can't cope with the pressure, she says, and she's going to educate one subject at a time to get them all the qualifications. I don't think there's an easy answer. It could be. It's hard to evidence. If we have data, obviously we will speak to a school if we have evidence or any data that is what's happening, but I can't answer that question one way or the other. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Are there any more questions at all? No? Well, thank you so much for coming, and very informative. I think we've all learnt an awful lot. You're more than welcome to stay for the rest of the evening, but if you'd like to get home, yeah.
Just didn't answer one question very briefly because you asked about the behaviour standards officer, and what we've done, because we're a small team, but we've had somebody leaving, we've had a little bit of more money we could put into something, so we've restructured everything. So that role will be half elective home education, where we have to think of the name carefully, so the standards part, and half supporting the behaviour and attendance advisor, as he is now, with supporting schools and championing children. And we really want them to champion those excluded children particularly. So that's what that role will do.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, can we move on to agenda item 8, and that's the update on the Ofsted report. I understand, Jed, that you're going to be busy for the next few agenda items. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And if I could draw your attention to the plan on a page, which circulated earlier, that's trying to encapsulate all of the issues around the improvement plan. As I say, the improvement plan has been circulated. It is on the council's website, but I do understand that it hadn't been as readily available as you might have liked. There is an improvement board which is independently chaired, which looks at the improvement progress, and we've had a very good launch of the plan with a range of partners were invited in September, and we've also had a follow-up launch of a new set of levels of need, because one of the criticisms in Ofsted was that we weren't very clear about when a child's need in terms of safeguarding, whether all partners understood it. So we had a launch about 2 weeks ago of this document, which actually covers the various needs, and that also will make available if it would be helpful to councillors. Yeah.
Yes, I think it definitely would. If we could have copies of that.
No problem. What I'm just going to run through is these are the sort of every improvement board, which meets every 6 weeks, I do an update on progress against the plan. And this is the same documentation. I think we said at the beginning of this process that I'd bring the same information here. And if you like it, I could bring to the next meeting some of the actions against individual items within the plan. What you got at the moment is the overall plan, and then the progress that I'm outlining here. But I also do a bigger version of that report, which says against each of the work streams. So we'll pull that together as well.
Yes, please. That would be really helpful.
But just to go through that, we're at the 3 areas really. One is the responding to the issues that were identified and our actions against that. Then we're moving into the strengthening phase. In many ways, going back to basics, saying, well, what are we doing well? What do we need to do better? How are we going to do it better? How will we know we've done it better? And how will we evidence it to both the lead councillor and to yourselves as a scrutiny committee, and more widely, how we're preparing for Ofsted. We have an Ofsted monitoring visit coming up next week. They'll be on site for 2 days on the 15th and 16th of October. It's a 3-day process, but the first day is off-site where they do all the documentation. And one of the reasons I'm here tonight doing this is because the team are actually preparing loads of the documentation that's needed for that. So I said, I think they've done enough preparation. So they're actually in another room finalising the files and documents that go off to Ofsted. But one of the things that we've said is we've got 9 work streams, which if you look at the plan on a page, at the bottom there, you've got the diagram showing the improvement board, and then you've got the 7 blue boxes, and under that, the voice of the child, and then about the enablers. They're the 9 work streams that we've been referred to, and each of those work streams has a plan of its own, and we're very small groups working on those. They are driving things forward, and then their progress is reported through to the steering group and into the improvement board. Bring to the improvement board those areas where there may be difficulties not between partners, but areas which we need partners to agree. So if there had been something about health, we have the senior health representative, there's some from police. If it's the council's issues, we can raise them there or challenge each other and support each other through that process. So each 6 weeks we do that. We've got a project manager in place. We've got a very strong program management approach to that. We're also working with Cheshire, West and Chester as our what's called partner in practice, or PIP. And they are an authority is recognised with real strengths, and they're working with us. At the moment, they're focusing on our front door, as it's called now, the Trafford Children's First Response, formerly MARAT. You've come across that terminology before, but that's where referrals come in. So they're working closely with us on that. They're also working with us on a range of data use and management development and skills development. So it's really helpful to have them involved. They're doing about 70 days of work, which is funded through the DFE. So it's part of that peer support approach. And as we said, we've had the launch on the 11th of September. In terms of the activities from September, we've had training for staff around how to be more effectively reflect the voice of the child. One of the things that the Ofsted report said is that we weren't actively listening to young people and their families. So we've made a major drive on that, about engaging young people, about engaging their families, and using a restorative practice approach, which concentrates on the strengths that families have, the issues that they're dealing with, and how we can actually build on those strengths and develop the areas of issue. And that's gone really well. Audits, we brought in an external team to do some work on audits, but also to train up our own staff. We have a new principal social worker who's heading up an audit team, and that audit team will be taking over that rigor in terms of the consistency and the approach to audit and the regularity of those audits. And we've also updated the referral forms, and that again was launched on 1st of October. A couple of mentions of liquid logic tonight already in terms of documentation. I've worked in a few authorities, and they often cry out for liquid logic because it is a very effective system. We've been good in Trafford in that we've had liquid logic for about 10 years, but that meant we have some early modules, and it's accrued some issues. So we had a full health check done on it, and also bringing in a new dashboard, which will give management information that can bring to you in probably after Christmas as that gets into play. So we're trying to update and clean out the system from liquid logic and make it much more effective and manageable. And we also had the frontline staff and a range of training and opportunities around the new levels of need, which you mentioned earlier. As part of the process as well about program management, we've introduced a risk register. And so we look at each of the areas and say, well, what are the things that could go wrong? How likely are they to go wrong? And again, something you'll have seen before in other meetings. But then identify them and say, well, okay, if that is a potential, the top red quartile, we report into the improvement board. And the ones that are on there, do we have the capacity to manage the early help cases? Have we got performance system support, front door and early help, lack of project support for early help, and the variable assessment practices? And you see early help figures in 3 of those, and that has been a major focus. We're bringing in additional support there, and we're putting together an early help offer, which we're bringing towards November, December time, which we'll be bringing to the board. So where there is an issue, it's not just reporting it, it's reporting what we're doing about it and what the particular issues are. Where we are doing well, try to highlight there, child protection plans have reduced. Child protection cases up until 2 years have also been reduced. The proportion of looked after children with annual health assessments completed is above target for the past 3 months. That had been an area of concern. And so there's been a lot of good work with health colleagues about that. Still an issue in some areas about initial health assessments, but referral decisions being made within timescales, proportion of children and family assessments being completed. All of those are factors in the negative inspection report, which we put right. Where we could do better, the looked after children cases are going up. Having said that, the actual number of looked after children is coming down again because we have a lot of good work in the assessment process. The number of open cases is going up, and there is this question is, does an Ofsted report make people a bit more risk averse and therefore refer more quickly? And that's seen in lots of authorities where there has been a poor Ofsted outcome, that other agencies, schools, police, health, whoever, start referring in more because they think this child may have a problem, I need to get in quickly. So it's about working with our partners about that particular area. And the number of contacts progressing to referral has reached unprecedented levels. That's been missed off the bottom, so keyword. We are having more contacts. So that's not necessarily a dangerous element, wouldn't go in the risk register yet, but it's a factor that we need to be aware of and working with the teams and doing that analysis, as you said. So part of it is identifying the issues, but coming up with the action plans to mitigate them and to take them forward. Back to those 3 points about reacting, strengthening, and embedding.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Longdon?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if you could take us through the risk register in your report that was on the agenda. I just kind of understand what it's attempting to do, but I think a little talk through it would be very helpful. Simple things like what do you mean by post mitigation? How does that relate to the objectives that you've highlighted? Obviously, like you, we'd be particularly concerned about the 4 that you've highlighted in the, I'm not sure what your colour code is, but red suggests that it's a worry. And I'm presuming those link back to the action plan. I tried to match it up myself, but couldn't quite get there. So, for example, C1PO1, C1PO2, 3 and 9, does that link to the 9 work streams?
Not directly. There'll be a link to them, but in particular the early help ones, because we have a work stream that's looking at early help. They'll identify them, and then we pull them into a risk register. So we give them that coding there, this children improvement plan area. And in terms of take the top one, lack of capacity to manage EH cases, or the second one, the third one's CRP3. Lack of project support. For example, there, what happened is the person who was doing the project support got a new role, and therefore the project support aspect on the left-hand side, the person had got a job, and we were filling that vacancy, and we're looking at different ways of utilising that, both resource and funding, to get somebody in quickly. So it was a risk because the person had gone, but the mitigation was to get in an alternative level of provision and advertise that post as quickly as possible. So that's what's been going on. So each of the work streams would look at its own particular issues, and if it is something that can be dealt with through the work stream itself, it's dealt with. If it can't be, it comes to the steering group, and the steering group looks at possibilities. And if we as a steering group feel that there's an issue that could have major consequences, impact on, this is what we're doing about it, but we wanted to alert them and also potentially challenge each other about, it might be the fact that my team or another team has got vacancies that are actually stopping that piece of work being delivered.
Thanks for explaining that. That's helpful.
Yeah, Kath, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it's just to say this is slightly out of context in a way, because it's just a snapshot, but actually this came in its current form to the improvement board, and I think members of the improvement board raised exactly the same questions. We weren't sure how you piece this together, and you've got post mitigation and you've got the risk register, but what you haven't got is any indication of what that mitigation is, and you haven't got
my next question, yeah.
what the risk is. There is lots and lots and lots of work, and I think we've asked for the certain members of the improvement board who said, actually, we want to see that full risk register, because it isn't actually in the action plan, I don't think, is it, Jed? So we've said, can we see it? I think it's apparently really, really big, and it may not be useful for everybody on the improvement board to have the full depth, but I think in this context, it's really difficult to see, isn't it? Well, what does that mean, and what happens once that mitigation's been put in place? Really, there's kind of a lot more detail that sits behind that. I don't know how much are we able to share, Jed, with members of the scrutiny committee some of the detail behind that? Is there any reason why we can't do that, do you think? Obviously not going to do it tonight, but yeah, of the risk and of kind of what might be put in place to mitigate. See, what we said in the improvement board, and it's probably likely to be what everybody in this room is thinking and beyond, is you've got some really critical things that are stuck in that red upper kind of quadrant there. that are still sat there. So I think I'd be really alarmed if I looked at that and thought, well, is there anything going on behind that? So I don't know whether we're able to share a bit more detail, perhaps at a future meeting if we are able.
Yeah, if I could, as Councillor Hines says, the board did ask that same sort of question about, well, what's the background to it? There is that issue about where, as a strategic board, if you then say, well, we want to look at the next level down and the next level down, and so we go through every detail of every one. What we were suggesting is bringing the heavy, the more risk-heavy issues to the board. But quite rightly, we're going to bring to the next improvement board more detail on those ones that are in that top quartile.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Acton.
Yeah, it's really on page 21, the performance doing well and could do better. I mean, those that are listed for doing well, I mean, are they doing well enough to get a nod from Ofsted that in those areas we're performing to what they expect? And they could do better. I just wonder how we're going to, deal with those issues.
Yeah. Definitely. Ofsted are going to be in next week doing a monitoring visit, and they'll look at progress since the Ofsted report back in March, and it was published in May. So they'll be expecting to see change. They'll be talking to staff, they'll be talking to, going through cases. They won't be coming back for a full inspection for probably 18 months, 2 years, but they'll be coming back every 3 to 4 months to look at particular aspects. So they would say, well, we said this was an issue. What have you done about it? And has it improved the life chances and service to those children and families? So they'll go through that whole process. As part of the work for myself and the team, and then clearly as the lead counsellor, we will want to see that progress on a more regular basis. So the lead counsellor and I meet every week. We have a monthly meeting in terms of performance information and data, and then the 6 weekly meeting we have of the improvement board. So there's quite a lot of scrutiny and oversight, and obviously this board itself. So yeah, you'd be expecting to see movement in those. So if I was bringing, as I said earlier, if I bring the update report on each of those areas, that could be part of the discussions as well.
Thank you. Councillor Proctor.
My question's about the could do better part. Is open cases going up and contacts moving from referral to needing action? Are there common themes? And if so, what are you going to put in place to deal with them?
One of the common themes is about caseloads for staff and support. And I mentioned earlier about the system itself, and the liquid logic and the whole of the IT system is quite creepy. And to make sure that we improve that system. So that's going on. We're also looking at caseloads and about staffing, and we've reduced the caseloads so that there's a much more balanced approach. Still something to work on. We're working on the idea of 20 cases as an average, and we're about 19 to 21 at the moment. So we're within that range. That's also linked into the structures we had in terms of the bureaucracy. There's a lot of paperwork flying around the system, and so we cut down on the paperwork. Part of this document and the other documents we use is it's back to basics. What are we supposed to be doing? Why we do that report, and somebody uses a slightly different one, and this team does it slightly different to the other team. To go a consistent approach across. So we're doing all of those things, and the expectation is that will embed. One of the good things about the improvement board and everybody else is, so we've had a bad Ofsted, we've got to put it right, and can we fix it today? And the answer is no. This is a 2-year plan, and so there's movement along, and what we're seeing is that progress. And what Ofsted will be looking at is, have you made progress over this period? When I spoke to the lead inspector the other day, she's saying, I'm not looking to see everything right from what was wrong before, but I want to see that there's been that development, and I think we can demonstrate that.
That's great. However, it didn't answer my question about, are there common themes in the children who we are now working with and their families? Thanks.
So I think there's the work that's happening obviously around Ofsted and the things that Ofsted have identified. I think some of what's in there, the fact that the numbers of looked after children is increasing, isn't necessarily something that was identified by Ofsted as a problem. And I think that there are national trends around the numbers of looked after children that is increasing. There is a wider piece of work that we're doing at the moment, really, to identify what are those reasons, really, why those numbers are increasing year after year. It's hit that is a trend. It's been going up. It's not something that's just recently spiked. Year on year, that has been happening over the last several years. Something that I think we are particularly concerned about, obviously, is how can we prevent the necessity for children to come into care? Obviously, when children need to come into care, it's absolutely critical that that's the case. But is there some targeting in a different way, support at the earliest intervention that will prevent escalation of that, where we've seen kind of early help support kind of coming out of the system? Do we know what impact that's had, and do we know what we kind of need to do to address that? So there is a wider piece of work that is looking at that, which doesn't necessarily neatly tick kind of an Ofsted box, but is a really, really important kind of piece of work for us to do. That, I think, is going to be a longer term approach, although there is work that we can obviously do in the shorter term as well.
Thank you, Kath. Councillor Carey.
Thank you, Jed, for coming in and doing all this work that you're doing. There seems to be a lot going on and it looks great. I've got two questions. My first one is, I mentioned this at the first meeting we had earlier in the year, that since I started here in this council in May 2008, we've always had an interim director. And I was wondering, when will we ever get a permanent director of children's services? Because surely that can only have a positive impact. Great news. My second one refers back to the minutes. Actually, I think it was the question I asked. Actually, just wanted to see if there's been any update on it. It says members sought clarification on the sharp deterioration of the Ofsted rating from outstanding to inadequate, and the leadership understanding of the situation. It was explained that this was a very complex issue, and more clarity would be done once the committee was able to see the final draft of the action plan. And I was wondering if we have any advancement on that, please. Thank you.
Take the 2 points. The DCS appointment is tomorrow and Thursday, and 4 candidates and panels. I think you're part of the panels for tomorrow, and hopefully an appointment will be made on Thursday. The second one, in terms of the sorry, could you just remind me again? Leadership. Sorry, yeah. One of the things that I think we touched on earlier was about the lead councillor and the leader of the council being members of the improvement board, and the regular updates. We're talking in terms of governance, that the leadership, both in terms of officers and in terms of oversight by politicians, was not as good as Ofsted expected to see it. And so we've been putting that right in terms of governance meetings, about governance approaches, and more rigorous scrutiny of the data sets that were available. We were very rich in data. I'm not sure we analysed it properly.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I think that this isn't something that
Thank you, Kath. Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question about one of the priority areas, early help? 3 out of the 4 issues in the red quadrants, CPI 1, 2 and 3 refer to early help. Yeah. And I sort of just wondered what kind of progress has been made to eradicate the issues.
Again, I think that would be really helpful if we could have access to that.
CIPO1 says lack of capacity to manage the early help cases. Is that due to the rising numbers, or is that due to the fact that there are staff who are doing sort of different roles and there are vacancies within the system?
If I could, it's a mixture of the two. There's a rise in demand, and also the issues about what early help offer we have available to us. So we have had a reduction in the youth service, which we're now addressing with the incorporation of the new youth engagement service. There was also about early help availability of services that most councils have had to do, were having to reduce some of those services. But also how we coordinate that offer has been part of it. So we've had fewer staff available to do some of those services, but also we commission a number of them. So what the early help team are doing now is building up a bigger profile of what we commission, how we commission, and models of support that we can offer families, and how we can be a bit more structured in doing that. So one of the things that we're coming forward to councillors will be about what is a good early help offer, how do we manage that, and how do we deliver it, and how do we resource it. So that'll be part of the planning in the next November, December time. Yeah, there's a couple of models being developed at the moment, and we're working with partners on that. So as I said earlier, we're at the start of that particular journey, but this is one of the key areas, because if we've got early help and early intervention, we should be preventing more serious issues in families developing.
Thank you. Councillor London.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I think it's really great that we've got this kind of risk matrix, which can, flag the issues up. I'm very grateful for that. But again, we need that extra information so that we can test what's going on there. It's interesting, the improvement board have asked for similar levels of information. I guess when it comes to this particular type of information, key role for us as the scrutiny committee is to be scrutinising the improvement board as well, ultimately, and not just yourself as the lead officer and the lead councillor. So I think particularly that higher level performance information, and of course the risk information, I think we need to have similar levels of detail so that we can have a good handle of what's going on, so that we can do our role effectively. And that kind of leads me on to my second question, which I did raise at the last meeting. Are we any further forward with identifying what the services performance indicators are going to be moving forward?
We've part of the work as the improvement board is developing one as well. So we've had a range of data sets, and we've narrowed that down to a manageable data set that was effective for their use. We've said that we'll provide that, and we can bring that to the next meeting if that would help. We've also been looking at the pace of delivery on those. So again, in your role of scrutiny, be more than happy to bring the update reports and the background information. In terms of the board itself, it is independently chaired, and that person is also a DFE official as our improvement advisor. So I'm not sure quite how you mean you would scrutinise the work of the improvement board. It's a time-limited body which would be expected to deliver. I think scrutinising the work of the outcomes of that body would be legitimate, but I'm not quite sure what you mean about scrutinising the role of the improvement board. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions, can we move on to item 9, which is just a brief report really on the fostering process, please, Jed.
I took the word brief there, Chair. No, that's fine. I got the message. But this report does give an update on where we're at in terms of recruitment activity. We had set ourselves a target of do the figures down the side there. We've got 4 were approved in May, another further 2 in June, 3 in August. We've got 1 waiting approval in September, and a further 9. So it gives us 19 that we're working on, which gives us very strongly towards our target. And then there's some more details about the various types of fostering arrangements we've got in place and where we're trying to develop. I think bring your attention to the No Wrong Door, which is a developing process, a program rather, which we're working across Greater Manchester and other authorities with. That's taking forward. There are a few teething problems in terms of recruitment, but that's moved on since this report was written. And also step down and the improvement in in-house foster carers and some figures there. Where I would draw your attention is the final paragraph about 18 children moved, the majority moved in a planned way. However, there were 8 young people, not that there were any risk or anything happened that would be a danger to them, but it wasn't quite what the plan had said. So what we're doing is a bit more in-depth study of those 8 particular cases to see why it went off plan. And there may be quite legitimate reasons, but it wasn't clear from their documentation why that had happened.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Dillon.
Just a few, I'm afraid, if that's okay. I'm not very good with numbers, so I kind of go a bit blurry when I look and see numbers, but just a few things stood out to me. On the page 2, Fostering Plus, it says there's currently 1 approved Fostering Plus household. I'm just wondering why, is that quite a low figure, why there is just the 1 there? You've just mentioned the No Wrong Door, you've explained about that you're struggling to recruit. Just wondering if there's any particular reason, again, for that. Also, how many foster carers do we actually have? And we seem to be recruiting new ones. I'm just wondering about the more experienced. How do we balance the experience of the new ones with the older ones? And I've been told that there was a survey, a recent fostering survey. I'm just wondering if there are any results out about that. Sorry, I know that's a lot, sorry.
I take the numbers. I think if I remember right, it's about 128 foster families, but I can get more detailed information to you if that would help. In terms of the balance of foster carers, we do have a regular recruitment, and foster carers are very cherished by all authorities and sought after by authorities, but getting them approved, and it's a timescale. So we're always recruiting, we're always replacing where appropriate, and also maintaining the existing foster carers. So we do a link up with mentoring for new foster carers with existing foster carers. We do training and support mechanisms there, and the foster carers also have their own mechanisms, coffee shops, coffee meetings, and there's a cake and a coffee can answer a lot of problems. Yeah. Sorry, I think you mentioned about the balance, and in terms of numbers, yeah, I've got them. Yeah.
Sorry. The fostering survey, somebody mentioned to me there was a fostering survey.
Yeah, fostering service carried out independently by Ofsted as well. We've had some feedback from that. There has been some negative issues, which we're addressing with the lead counsellor in terms of bringing some of the foster carers and ourselves together. There is a Have Your Say group, which we're working with, and we're also meeting some of the individuals about that. And we're talking about another stage of that, about bringing in some mediation to see what the particular issues are and how we're going to address them.
Thank you. Councillor Acton, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just where you talk about in the report on page 2, excellent progress has been made to reduce the number of children in external children's home. And I think that's really, really positive. But then it goes on to say, but there is currently no capacity to progress the development of an in-house specialist fostering scheme. And this presents a risk with regard to developing our capacity for children. And I'd like to know what that capacity is, because when you read the cost of external care as opposed to internal care, whether that's our own in-house provision or as an invest to save, and it's how we actually provide that and how quickly we can provide it, because the sooner we can provide it, the better it will be in terms of funding, but also in terms of the care that we provide. So I think that has to be some kind of priority.
Definitely. I think there's an issue in terms of the recruitment of foster carers. It is a lengthy process, and they're in demand in lots of authorities as well. So we're trying to increase the number of the foster carers that we have, but also ensuring the high quality that the children need. In terms of the next report, does look at the equivalent cost of out-of-borough and in-borough placements. Part of what we've been looking at, I think, with our colleagues in adult services as well, is about provision in-house. And I think the phrase was about, think Trafford first, or along that kind of direction. Trafford is home was another one that was used. So about saying we should look internally first, but if we can't find the appropriate setting internally, we must look elsewhere. And we're a relatively geographically small borough. So you see from the next ones, a lot of our young people are placed in neighbouring authorities as well. The national idea is within a 20-mile radius. The bulk of our children are much or within that 20-mile radius. So we're developing that. If we were looking at in-house provision, that is that longer-term investment process, which really is coming into the budget planning cycle for next year and 21-22.
Thank you. Councillor Proctor.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. My first one is on page 2. You talk about no capacity to progress the development of an in-house specialist fostering service. What happened to the in-house specialist fostering service from a number of years ago, where staff and foster carers were recruited into a team based, I think, from memory, in Hazewater? I don't know what happened, about what the results were and why it was abandoned. And my other question is about how we go about recruiting foster carers, and then, how we go about it. Has anyone looked at what are the most effective ways to recruit foster carers locally or nationally that we can maybe learn from? Thank you.
Yeah, take that first one. The in-house fostering service, like a lot of authorities, it just wasn't a viable option in terms of the resources involved there. But I can get. I wasn't around at the time, obviously, with that one, but I can get more detail. But that would be my expectation, and that was the reason. In terms of the recruiting foster carers, like all authorities, we have an ongoing campaign, be it on buses, through the media. We're also looking at things like social media attempts, but also working with the existing foster carers to get their ideas about what attracted them and so on. Work across Greater Manchester and the Northwest, and we'll take ideas from any other authority that has them. Most authorities are doing the same sort of things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor New.
Yeah, I know some foster carers, and I believe that they requested a meeting about the Ofsted findings. I'm wondering if you could tell me, please, will they be getting any follow-up information on that? And also, of the children that are currently fostered, can you tell me how many of them are engaging with the Children in Care Council, please? And how else are we going about getting to hear the voice of the child in that situation, please?
Yeah, myself and Councillor Hines did attend a couple of the meetings with foster carers, and we've offered further meetings as well as part of that process, which we touched on earlier. Part of the work in the improvement plan is also about how we engage with the voice of the child. And in terms of the Children in Care Council, the numbers vary. I haven't got the figure off the top of my head, but we had a very impressive presentation by the young people who came to the corporate parenting panel last month. Very, very impressive. And we're encouraging them in. And one of the things that they were saying is, in terms of young people getting their views, there's actually a panel tomorrow who are going to be part of the selection process for the new director. So we brought them into that process. But what they did say is, let's not have lots of surveys or bring them into meetings like, not necessarily this, but any meetings. Said, please don't keep doing that to us. So we're looking at working with them on terms of video links and them doing their own as much as possible, because they're the important factor in this. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Blackburn.
Could I just ask a question about the children or young people that move to an independent fostering agency place? Did those individuals go because those carers had specialist skills that our carers didn't have?
We've got a range of skills in both our own foster parents and also in the independent fostering agency. Really, it's a question of matching the child with the right placement. And in some cases, our first aim is for our own foster carers, but the numbers are limited, and we're trying to recruit. The thing is, we work with independent foster carers, and the quality is the issue there. So we're always making sure we get quality foster carers to match with our children. Yeah.
Thank you. Jed, if you wouldn't mind, can we move on to item 10, which is the out of area placement, which follows on beautifully from that. So
Fabiola's impressed that I can press the right buttons, aren't you? I can see, yeah. So if I do that one. There you go. If I go fairly rapidly through this one, this actually touches on something that Council mentioned earlier about the number of young people placed with independent foster agencies. And this gives you, I think, a very useful set of data about the ages of the young people. You can see the peaks in the teenage years, but also in terms of the gender split, where their age ranges, where their placement and the length of placement, but particularly the cost of placement. And you can see there the average cost of a placement and also the average cost where placed in Trafford. So we try to do that with each of these slides about the independent fostering agencies. The same applied to the in-house fostering. So it's good. I don't know why it's going off the screen there, but the bottom section. My copy. about where the young people are placed and the average cost. And the average cost for an in-house placement is about 374, around that sort of level, which compares with the earlier one about £900 plus a week. So it's quite a difference in the cost of placements. The same applies to residential placement. But I should point out, if the child needs that level of placement, the cost isn't a determining factor. It's simply a reflection of the complexity of some of the placements we have to make. And the same applies there. The external 18 young people, residential placements, mainly male, but again, small numbers. But the average cost there is about just over £3,500 a week. We do work with Greater Manchester and with the Northwest in terms of sourcing placements, and also working with providers about the level of charges. But again, if we have a very complex case and a very urgent need, it's difficult to start finding exactly the right placement. So work Trafford first, then Greater Manchester area, and then the Northwest. And if necessary, if it's a very serious sort of secure placement, for example, we go where there are places available. Oh, gone. So that's the external residential, the internal, and the internal fostering and independent fostering.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Acton.
Yeah, it's just really on the GM really, because there has been talk for a number of years now to develop, our own provision for those, difficult placements and expensive placements, particularly. I just wonder, are we getting any further?
Yeah, there's work going on by a group in Greater Manchester, DCSs, and we brought in work with the Northwest group as well. And we're looking at the types of placements, the cost of those placements, and the level of use of those placements. If you take, for example, Barton Moss in Salford, is a particular placement, and how it works because of its size. But most of the placements we use are small scale, and we're looking at that. So if you have a child with a particularly complex set of needs for that type of placement, there aren't many sets as well. Again, the number of placements available across the country are limited. So we've been doing some work with national government as well about whether there should be more developments, but they're very expensive. And if they've got empty, if say, for example, Trafford was asked to build a new facility, there's also that risk that you could have a 20-place unit with only 5 young people in it, but you're still paying all the costs that are associated with it. So you'd have to get agreement with partners that, like in Greater Manchester, would everybody make their full contribution, even if they weren't taking up those particular places.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? No. If that's all right, then can we move on to the child protection plan updates, please?
Thank you, Chair. Some positives in this report as well, in terms of the in previous report, we said that about 20% of the cohort of young people were on second plans. There's always a risk in that. If it's needed, it's a good thing that we can review the plan. But this isn't just about reviewing plans, it's repeating those plans. And that puts a strain on families. It leaves them in almost an undetermined position. So what we've done is reviewed our processes, and we've reduced the number of second plans from the 29 down to the 20.4. And that matches up with regional and national averages of 20 to 21. So I think that's a good news story in a very short report.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? No? I think the next item on the agenda is the Corporate Parenting Board update. As Jed said earlier, I think that the beauty, I've now attended 2 of these meetings and absolutely delighted to feel that we really do hear the voice of the child at both meetings. We've had children at the first one in July. We had them from the Children in Care Council, which covers all ages. Really interesting. And at the September meeting, as well as having an update on adoption and on fostering from officers, we also had a cheeky chappie, I won't name him, but he was super. But I think we actually get to hear the things that really and truly matter to these children. And it's things like bedrooms, mobile phones, rules. I think a lot, I think what stuck in my mind that was, if these children go from one home to another, the rules are different. And I think children, particularly children that are in a vulnerable situation, they do need continuity. I think it's very, very important to them that they've got structures in place. I think one of the other things was contact with social workers, that they felt that was very, very important. I don't know if Kath wants to add any more. It is a while ago now, isn't it, since we had the meetings?
Yeah, and I think the point that the children, and it isn't the first time that we've heard this, and I think we need to make sure that this is something that's communicated with our foster carers and our children's homes as well, is how important it is to those children that they maintain their relationships with friends, and how important their mobile phone, what a role their mobile phone will play in that, arriving at a new placement, and that night having to go, to bed in a house that you've never lived in before, with people that you've probably never met before, being able to take your mobile phone and text your friends and say, and perhaps, even just to say good night to them was really, really important. But in some households, they might arrive there and there might be a rule, well, you can't have your mobile phone in your bedroom. And that immediately cuts you off from, a world that you might know. So, they've just kind of talked to us about lots of things that are really important. We've had the after the Care Leavers Forum as well, talking about kind of the after care support that we can offer, really, and making sure that we are preparing kind of children and young adults for life, support them with their aspiration, being able to prepare them, kind of give them some resilience. We talked, I think not the last one, but the one before that, about preparing kids perhaps who are leaving care for perhaps going to university, and all of the things that you might do with your own children as corporate parents. Are we doing those same things for the children in care? There's been loads of feedback that they've given us, and I think the feedback that I've had since I started chairing the meetings is that part of the meeting is the most valuable part of the meeting. And I think, Councillor, you said before, what are we doing to hear the voice of the child? I think there is probably nothing more important than that, actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Acton.
Yeah, it sounds really positive, that engagement. How do you report back to them once they've raised issues with you? How do you report back to them? Because the worst thing that can happen is that you all listen to it and then nothing happens after that.
100%. And that was something that I think was really important when I first kind of had this responsibility of chairing this really important board. And that was something that really struck me. Actually, if we're going to do this, it has to be something meaningful. So we've got a log now where we record what's being said, and then to the next meeting, as part of that segment, which we are now dedicating quite a big chunk of that meeting to, is that space to report back to the children and young people. This is what you said last time you came to us, and this is what we've done since then. And actually, likewise, it isn't just that segment, it's for the whole of that corporate parenting meeting. So where we've had reports that have come and there's been a discussion, making sure that discussion is recorded, and then and there is a clear action log, not just for members of the council either. I think we we made a decision as a board really that it was important for all of the partners that are also corporate parents to have that space to feed back on actions that they had done since the last meeting, and that's been something that we're developing and taking through, which has been quite valuable actually.
Thank you, Kath. Jed, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it's exactly on that point about they said we did. But also it was the maturity of the discussions where we're saying there'll be some things that they were asking which we quite clearly couldn't deliver on or wouldn't deliver on, as any parent would be if they said we all want X, and we said, well, we can't do that. And we said we would give you reasons and discuss it with you, and they were very sensible about it. They said, yeah, well, we thought we'd ask. And we talked it through. So there's a really good feedback mechanism as well. And they were interested in getting more involved. And when we talked about the Care Leavers Takeover Day, which we'd had recently, and we've got another one coming up in the middle of November, there were a lot of volunteers from other partners to say, yes, I'd like to work with the Care Leavers and have one follow me, be engaged in my decision-making processes. And on the next Care Leavers Takeover Day, we've actually got the DFE in doing their monitoring visit, which is real fun. But we're getting them to meet with the care leavers so they can hear the voice of those young people who've been through the process and what it was like for them and what they would like to see changed.
Thank you. If there are no more questions on that, the last item on the agenda is our work programme for 2019 to 20. Is everybody happy with that? If you want to have a think about it, if there's anything you'd like to add at all, if you could just let us know. Quite prepared to be flexible with it. And the only thing I did want to say, following on from a presentation we had last meeting from Healthy Young Minds, I'm very concerned about the CAMS, as it was called previously. And I don't know if anybody would be interested in a task and finish group. I know Health Scrutiny did a task and finish 2 or 3 years ago now, but I was certainly very concerned, with the increase of need in this area, and also the waiting times, which was sometimes sort of 6 months, and that's a long time out of a young person. No, if you're interested in that, and I'd like to get that off the ground. Any other business at all? No? Well, in that case, thank you all for attending. I think we've done quite well on a rather large agenda again, and wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you.